I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
No matter where you go, there you are.
That iconic line has become a pop culture mainstay thanks to one of the strangest movies of the 1980s, Buckaroo Banzai, or, as it's actually titled, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. This 1984 science fiction movie has been a cult classic for 4 decades and remains a fan favorite amongst those who've actually seen it thanks to its virtually inexplicable plot. Part comedy, part action, part sci-fi, part martial arts, part musical, part western, part satire, and part of a franchise that never came to be, Buckaroo Banzai just might be the single most bizarre movie we have ever covered for this series.
The time has come, everybody. Prepare for my return.
A huge box office bomb when it was first released, grossing only $6 million against a $17 million budget, Buckaroo Banzai holds a decent 68% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, where critics sum it up succinctly as violating every rule of storytelling and narrative structure in creating a self-contained world of its own. Yeah, folks, that's from Variety, by the way. And you know what? That pretty much sums up exactly why this movie has remained a personal favorite of ours here at JoBlo for so very long. Buckaroo Banzai was released when Western pop culture was obsessed with Japanese and Chinese culture, releasing 2 years after Blade Runner and the same year as both The Karate Kid and 16 Candles. While the Asian influence is palpable, Buckaroo Banzai often feels like a teenager's fever dream that throws everything but the kitchen sink into this crazy story.
Excuse me, Mr. President, I have to go talk to the Hornet's Nest.
Good God.
Its legacy is so strong that everything from Star Trek and Men in Black to Fight Club and Back to the Future have featured references to the movie. In fact, many Buckaroo Banzai fans have spotted direct connections to Robert Zemeckis' Back to the Future, whose flux capacitor bears a remarkable similarity to the film's oscillation overthruster. Wes Anderson's The Life Aquatic also shares more than a few connections in regards to the offbeat tone and team dynamic in both movies. In short, Buckaroo Banzai is a weirdly wonderful movie that not enough people have watched. The origins of this film came about in 1974 when director W.D. Richter was introduced to the writings of Earl Mac Roche. Both alumni of Dartmouth College, Richter read Roche's novel Dirty Pictures from the Prom, and the two started writing letters to each other. After several years, Roche met Richter in LA and began working as a screenwriter. When Roche first explained his idea for a character named Buckaroo Bandy, Richter and his wife paid the writer $1,500 to develop what he envisioned as inspired by all of those all-out, press the accelerator to the floor, non-stop kung fu movies of the early 70s. Richter recalls that Roche started writing multiple screenplays featuring the character, who was renamed Buckaroo Banzai, and would abandon each after only getting about 30 pages into it. Roche himself remembered how easy it was to start a story and then forget about it. Over those early years, the writer compiled dozens of scripts that ended up that way, including treatments with titles like Find the Jet Car, Said the President, The Strange Case of Mr. Cigars, and more. Richter says it never made its way to the finished script as Roche would continue writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. The development of Buckaroo Banzai paused when Richter began working on a screenplay for Martin Scorsese's film New York, New York, amongst other unproduced scripts. It was finally in 1980 that Richter met with producers Frank Marshall and Neil Canton. Canton and Richter formed their own production company and planned to make Buckaroo Banzai their first film. This time, Roche wrote a screenplay called Lepers from Saturn, which they shopped around, but no studio was willing to take a risk on such a strange product from unproven filmmakers. The treatment eventually made its way to MGM UA, who signed Richter and Roche to a deal within 24 hours. Over the next 18 months, Saturn became Planet 10, and Lepers became Lectroids.
What are they?
Lectroids from Planet 10 by way of the 8th dimension.
The project was jeopardized in 1980 by the Writers Guild of America strike. MGM chief David Begelman left the studio and took Buckaroo Banzai to 20th Century Fox, where they were greenlit with a $12 million budget. 3 drafts later, the shooting script was ready and casting began. While the studio wanted a recognizable face, Richter wanted an actor who could both look heroic with grease all over his face and project the kind of intelligence you would associate with a neurosurgeon and inventor. Focused on stage actors, Richter stumbled upon Peter Weller. Weller was initially reluctant to take the role because of the uneven tone. Weller recalled, would it be campy, would it be a cartoon, or would it be the sort of wacky realistic film that could catch people sideways and not be a cartoon?
I didn't understand it, and I don't quite understand it to this day.
Weller apparently based his character on Elia Kazan, Jacques Cousteau, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, and Adam Ant. Seeing as how his character is a physicist, neurosurgeon, test pilot, rock star, that seems to be the right mix of inspiration.
And that's about all there is really to say about that.
For the villainous Dr. Emilio Lizardo, the studio wanted yet another unknown, but Roche always envisioned John Lithgow, who was riding high at the time, as Banzai's nemesis. Lithgow was also unsure of playing the role, but has always said in the past that this is one of the favorite roles that he ever played. Lithgow apparently copied his Italian accent from Roberto Timonelli, a tailor who worked at MGM.
May I pass along my congratulations for your great interdimensional breakthrough?
He also adopted a crab-like walk to imitate the alien nature of the character. Banzai's love interest, Penny Pretty, is played by Ellen Barkin.
Was she very beautiful?
She was Queen of the Netherlands.
That's a long way from where I come from.
Christopher Lloyd was the one and only choice to portray John Big Booty.
Understand, monkey boy? Let's get out of here, John O'Connor.
And the rest of the cast was rounded out by Jeff Goldblum as New Jersey, Lewis Smith as Perfect Tommy, and Clancy Brown as Rawhide. Other notable supporting characters are played by the great Vincent Schiavelli, Dan Hedaya, comedian Yakov Smirnoff, and no name to me says the 1980s more than Yakov Smirnoff, and Breaking Bad's Jonathan Banks, plus Carl Lumley. Production designer Jane Michael Riva worked with Richter for 2 years to develop the look of Buckaroo Banzai, which resulted in a blend of 80s fashion with an off-kilter approach to the alien designs. The lizard-like lectroids were inspired by an anthropologist's theory of what dinosaurs would have looked like had they evolved like humans. The red lectroids' clothing was inspired by Russian utilitarian clothing. The spaceships differ from what audiences had come to expect from Star Wars and Star Trek and take on a much more organic appearance. This was evident in the less polished look of the film, which echoes the dystopian look of movies like Mad Max rather than the refined look of Star Trek. Filmed in and around Los Angeles, Buckaroo Banzai was a challenge for the studio to release with copious scenes removed at the 11th hour, including an alternate opening featuring Jamie Lee Curtis as Buckaroo's mother. Richter was constantly at odds with producer Bigelman, who he called an enemy of the entire film. 20th Century Fox was equally concerned about the marketing of the movie, which they could not figure out. In a move that would echo the last decade or so of studios at San Diego Comic-Con, Fox began marketing Buckaroo Banzai directly at Star Trek conventions. They showed clips and gave out branded headbands, which are now highly sought-after collector's items. There was no traditional marketing push for the movie aside from some ads in Marvel Comics. Even John Lithgow has stated he struggled to explain the story to people despite loving how complex and weird it is. When it hit theaters on August 15, 1984, it went up against Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and more. And with competition like that, it should be no surprise that Banzai grossed less than half of its budget. Critics called it unintelligible. But how did it go from bomb to cult classic? Buckaroo Banzai is the closest thing Hollywood has produced to England's Doctor Who. Like the long-running BBC series, Buckaroo Banzai is an amalgam of dozens of genre staples combined with a blend of tones and styles. There are no direct jokes in Buckaroo Banzai, yet it's also kind of funny.
If we blow this today, there ain't no tomorrow.
Peter Weller is so damn cool in the title role that it's amazing to see just how different he is here compared to his later roles in RoboCop and, of course, recently in Star Trek Into Darkness. Ellen Barkin was at the height of her sexiness, with Peggy Pretty ranking as a sci-fi sex symbol to rival Carrie Fisher in Return of the Jedi. Like many cult classics from the 80s, Buckaroo Banzai suffers from comparisons to Star Wars. Similar to George Lucas's franchise, Buckaroo Banzai has deep roots in the serials of the 1940s and 1950s like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. But rather than follow a straightforward genre formula, Banzai is absolutely a film about nerds and geeks made by nerds and geeks. The complicated jargon, coupled with archaic special effects, lends the film the feel of an independently produced feature rather than one coming from the same studio as The Empire Strikes Back. There's not a lot of violence or sex in Buckaroo Banzai, which lends the film a feeling of innocence that belies the fairly mature subject matter. This is a family-friendly film that should appeal to kids and teens, but with the pacing and tone of a more adult-centric story. Maybe it's that disconnect that prevented the film from finding a wider audience. Also, I think the movie probably has a little too much music. I mean, Peter Weller kind of stops the show to do some singing, and I don't know if that's exactly what people wanted in a sci-fi action film. Definitely not what I wanted. That said, the rest of the score by Michael Boddicker is amazing, especially the ending march where they're all kind of walking along. In fact, that is the scene that's pretty much copied by the end credits of The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. Here's a little trivia fact. The theme song by Michael Boddicker at the time wasn't quite ready, so the song they're actually walking along to is Uptown Girl by Billy Joel. If you play this scene while listening to Uptown Girl, you'll notice that, well, they're walking completely in time to that song. It's pretty cool. So maybe it's the disconnect between sci-fi, comedy, musical, western, and every other genre that it kind of embraces that prevented it from finding a wider audience. But like those on the cutting edge of science or musicians invested in rock and roll, Buckaroo Banzai is indebted to everything that came before it and feels like nothing else out there. Buckaroo Banzai is unabashedly a 1980s movie that looks dated 4 decades later. As we approach the movie's Ruby anniversary, there is finally a sequel coming in the form of a novel by Roche titled Buckaroo Banzai Against the World Crime League, which is set to be published this Halloween. If you ever watch the film, you'll notice that it ends with a tease for, I suppose, what they hoped would be a sequel Against the World Crime League, and the head of the World Crime League, Hanoi Shan, keeps getting mentioned in the film. So, hopefully this World Crime League book kind of pays off for all of us huge Buckaroo Banzai fans. This, of course, is the perfect chance to revisit this classic movie and revisit some of the best costumes and quote you never knew you were missing. And who knows, Buckaroo Banzai may ride again one day. Kevin Smith once said that he was going to turn it into a series, but it never happened. Until then, it really is the best movie you never saw. And if you like these kinds of videos, make sure to click on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We're an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.